hanging pictures. It seemed so simple when I bought the frames and prints. Now, staring at the blank wall, the task felt enormous. Especially since I'm terrible at anything remotely handy. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, lived next door. He was always puttering around in his garden, fixing things. 59 years old, he seemed to know everything about everything. I hesitated, though. Asking for help felt weird. I barely knew him, just a friendly wave now and then. What if he was busy? What if he thought I was a total klutz? Still, the pictures weren't going to hang themselves. Taking a deep breath, I walked over and knocked on his door, hoping it wouldn't be too much of an imposition. Maybe he'd just tell me what to do, and I could handle the rest. A quick favor, in and out. That's all it would be. The door opened, and there he was, Mr. Henderson, wearing his usual denim shirt and a friendly smile. He had kind eyes, crinkled at the corners from years of smiling, I guessed. His hair was mostly gray, neatly combed back. He wasn't handsome in a movie star kind of way, but he had a comfortable, lived-in look that was appealing. "Well, hello there," he said, his voice warm and a little bit gravelly. "What can I do for you?" I explained about the pictures, stumbling over my words a little. I felt my cheeks getting warm. "I'm just terrible at this sort of thing," I admitted with a nervous laugh. "I was hoping you might have some advice, or, well, maybe even be willing to lend a hand?" I looked at him hopefully. He seemed so capable, so calm. I already felt a little better just having him there. He was a reassuring presence. "Of course, I can help," Mr. Henderson said with a smile that reached his eyes. "Hanging pictures is no problem at all. Just give me a minute to grab my toolbox, and we'll get those beauties up on the wall." Relief washed over me. He wasn't going to brush me off or make me feel silly. "Oh, thank you so much," I said, my voice lighter now. "I really appreciate it." He disappeared inside his house for a moment, and I took the opportunity to smooth down my hair and take another deep breath. This was going to be easy. Just a friendly neighbor helping out. No big deal. But a tiny flutter of something tickled in my stomach. Maybe it was just the relief. Or maybe it was something else entirely. The thought made my cheeks flush again. I hoped he wouldn't notice. He came back out carrying a sturdy-looking metal toolbox. "All right," he said, "let's go make your living room look fantastic." My living room was small but cozy, with a comfy couch and a big window overlooking the street. The walls, however, were bare and crying out for some art. The pictures I'd chosen were a mix of landscapes and abstract prints, nothing too fancy. I had them leaning against the wall, still wrapped in their protective paper. Mr. Henderson surveyed the room with a practiced eye. "Nice and bright in here," he commented. "Good light for showing off those pictures." He set his toolbox down on the floor with a clunk. "So, where do you want to start? Got any idea of the layout?" I pointed to the blank space above the couch. "I was thinking of putting the landscape there," I said. "It's the biggest one." I unwrapped the picture, revealing a serene scene of mountains and trees. It looked so much better than the empty wall. But getting it up there, that was the challenge. The air felt suddenly thick with unspoken possibilities. Just two neighbors, hanging a picture. What could possibly go wrong? Or right? "Looks like we'll need the ladder," Mr. Henderson said, rummaging in his toolbox. He pulled out a small, folding ladder that I hadn't even noticed he'd brought. "Safety first, you know." He unfolded the ladder and placed it carefully against the wall. It was closer to me than I expected. He stepped back, assessing the placement. "Think that's high enough?" he asked. I nodded, feeling a little self-conscious. "Yeah, I think so." He gave the ladder a little shake to make sure it was stable. "All right then," he said. "I'll hold it steady for you. Don't want you falling and hurting yourself." He positioned himself behind the ladder, his hands gripping the sides. His stance was solid, reassuring. The ladder, suddenly, felt like a very small space, and Mr. Henderson felt very close. Too close, maybe? Or was that just my imagination running wild? I took a deep breath and cautiously climbed the first step. Halfway up the ladder, I wobbled slightly. Just a little, but enough to make me grab onto the rungs tighter. That's when it happened. Mr. Henderson reached out and placed his hand lightly on my arm, just above my elbow. "Steady there," he said, his voice low and close to my ear. "Take your time." The touch was electric. A jolt, not unpleasant, shot through me. It wasn't a lingering touch, just a brief moment of contact, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. His hand was warm and calloused, and it felt good. Unexpectedly good. I looked down at him, trying to gauge his expression, but his face was hidden in shadow. I quickly refocused on the task at hand, trying to ignore the tingling sensation on my arm and the sudden heat in my cheeks. I reached the top of the ladder, my legs feeling a little shaky. "Okay," I said, my voice a little breathless. "I'm ready." But was I really? Mr. Henderson stepped back a little, tilting his head and squinting at the wall. He said, stroking his chin thoughtfully. "I think we need to move it a little to the left. Just a smidge." He wasn't looking at the picture, he was looking at me. His eyes met mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something different. Something that wasn't just neighborly concern. It was a look that lingered a little too long, a look that held a hint of interest? Desire? I couldn't quite decipher it, but it sent another shiver down my spine. Was I imagining things? Was I projecting my own feelings onto him? Maybe. But the intensity in his gaze felt undeniably real. I swallowed hard and shifted my weight on the ladder, trying to break the connection. "Okay," I said, a little too quickly. "A little to the left." "Got it." I busied myself with the picture, trying to avoid his eyes. What was happening here? This was definitely not just a quick favor anymore. "Where did you get this picture, anyway?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice casual, but his eyes still holding that unnerving intensity. "Oh, it's from a little gallery downtown," I said, relieved to have a normal topic of conversation. "I saw it and just fell in love with it. Reminded me of a trip I took to the mountains a few years ago." "Mountains are good for the soul," he said, nodding. "Get you away from all the hustle and bustle." "Exactly," I agreed. "What about you? Do you like to travel?" I found myself genuinely curious. "I used to," he said, a hint of wistfulness in his voice. Before my wife passed away. We traveled all over. But not so much anymore." The air shifted again, becoming heavier with unspoken emotions. A wave of sympathy washed over me. I hadn't even considered that he might be a widower. It made him seem more vulnerable, more human. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "I can't imagine." He looked up at me, his eyes softening. "Well, we all have our burdens to bear," he said, a small, sad smile playing on his lips. "But life goes on, right?" He reached out again, this time pointing to the wall near where I was holding the picture. "You know," he said, his fingers brushing against my hand, "I think the wall might be a little uneven here. We might need to use a different kind of nail." The contact was brief, but it sent another wave of heat through me. This time, it was a more deliberate touch, a subtle exploration. My heart pounded in my chest. Was he doing this on purpose? Was he testing the waters? I looked down at our hands, so close together, and felt a dizzying mix of fear and excitement. This was definitely getting out of hand. But a part of me, a very insistent part, didn't want it to stop. "Oh," I stammered, trying to sound casual. "Okay. Whatever you think is best." What was I doing? This was insane. I barely knew this man. He was old enough to be not my father, but close. And yet, here I was, practically buzzing with anticipation, wanting him to touch me again. Was I completely losing my mind? Maybe it was the loneliness, the lack of connection in my life. Maybe it was just the thrill of the unexpected. Whatever it was powerful. I glanced down at Mr. Henderson, who was now rummaging through his toolbox again, seemingly oblivious to the turmoil raging inside me. He looked so ordinary, so normal. How could this ordinary task have turned into something so charged, so potentially scandalous? I took another deep breath, trying to regain some semblance of composure. This was my neighbor, helping me hang a picture. That's all it was. That's all it had to be. Right? Mr. Henderson pulled out a measuring tape, and as he extended it, the metal end slipped from his fingers and snapped back into the case with a loud thwack. He winced. "Oops," he said with a sheepish grin. "Guess I'm not as steady as I used to be." I couldn't help but laugh. It was such a small, silly moment, but it broke the tension that had been building between us. "Don't worry," I said, smiling back. "Happens to the best of us." He chuckled, his eyes crinkling again at the corners. "Well, I appreciate you saying that." He tried again, this time managing to hold on to the tape. "All right, let's get this right this time, shall we?" The shared laugh felt good, like a reset button. For a moment, the awkwardness and the unspoken desires faded away, replaced by a simple, genuine connection. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe he was just being a friendly neighbor. Maybe this whole thing wasn't as complicated as I was making it out to be. "You know," Mr. Henderson said, carefully marking the spot on the wall with a pencil, "I remember helping my wife hang a whole gallery wall once. It was a disaster. We ended up with more holes than picture frames." He chuckled again, a fond look in his eyes. "She was so particular, everything had to be just perfect." He paused, his gaze softening. "Took us a whole weekend, but we finally got it right. It was one of her favorite things in the house." The anecdote felt intimate, a glimpse into his past, his love. It humanized him even more, making him seem less like a kindly neighbor and more like a real person with a rich history. I found myself drawn to his vulnerability, his willingness to share such a personal memory. The tension, though still present, had shifted, replaced by a feeling of connection? A shared understanding of loss and love. "That sounds beautiful," I said softly. I'm sure she appreciated it. And I appreciated him sharing it with me. He picked up a nail from the toolbox, holding it up to the light. "Now, the trick is," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "to angle the nail just right. That way, it'll hold better and won't damage the wall as much." He looked up at me, his eyes locking with mine. The intensity was back, stronger than before. It felt like he was trying to communicate something without words, a silent invitation. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The air crackled with unspoken desires. He stepped closer, his body almost touching mine. "See," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He reached out and gently adjusted my hand, positioning the nail. "Like this." His fingers lingered on mine, warm and firm. The contact was electric, sending shivers down my spine. I could feel his breath on my cheek, his body heat radiating towards me. It was almost unbearable. I knew, in that moment, that I wanted him. I wanted him to kiss me, to touch me, something. Anything. The line between neighborly help and something much more had completely blurred. He stepped back, giving me some space, but his eyes never left mine. He picked up the hammer, the metal glinting in the light. "Now," he said, his voice still low and slightly husky, "you want to hold the hammer like this. Firm grip, but not too tight. And then, you want to." He demonstrated the motion, swinging the hammer gently through the air. I wasn't paying attention to the hammer. I was watching his hands. They were strong hands, work-worn, with calluses and age spots. They were the hands of a man who had lived a full life, a life of hard work and love. And they were the hands that had just touched me, sending shivers down my spine. I found myself strangely fascinated by them. I wondered what it would be like to feel those hands on my skin, exploring my body. The thought made my breath catch in my throat. This was getting more and more intense. I had to focus. Right, I said, trying to sound normal. Firm grip. Got it. He held out the hammer towards me, handle first. Your turn, he said, his voice a little softer now. I reached out to take it, our fingers brushing again. This time, the contact was more prolonged, more deliberate. His skin felt warm and dry against mine. A tiny spark jumped between us. For a split second, I thought he was going to pull me closer, to kiss me. But then, he released the hammer, and the moment was gone. I took the hammer, my hand trembling slightly. I could feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. The weight of the hammer felt heavy in my hand, but it was nothing compared to the weight of the unspoken desire that hung in the air between us. I looked down at the nail, trying to focus on the task at hand, but my mind was racing. Was I reading too much into this? Was he feeling the same thing I was? Or was I completely delusional, projecting my own fantasies onto an innocent man? I had to know. But how? I took a deep breath, steadied the nail, and started to hammer. The first few taps were tentative, but then I gained confidence. Asterisk thwack. 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 Asterisk the sound echoed in the small room, each strike a release of pent-up energy. I glanced at Mr. Henderson, who was still holding the ladder steady, his eyes fixed on me. He gave me a small, encouraging smile. Finally, the nail was in, flush with the wall. I stepped back to admire my work. The picture was hanging straight and true. Well, I said, feeling a surge of pride, I think I did it. Mr. Henderson stepped forward, his presence filling the space around me. He looked at the picture, then back at me, his eyes full of something. You did great, he said, his voice low and sincere. It looks perfect. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the picture hanging between us like a silent testament to the unexpected connection that had formed between us. The tension was still there, but it was different now, charged with a new sense of possibility. The silence stretched out, punctuated only by the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway. It was a comfortable silence, though, a silence filled with unspoken understanding. I knew I should say something, break the spell, but I couldn't seem to find the words. Finally, I cleared my throat. So, I said, a little too brightly, should we move on to the next one? Mr. Henderson blinked, as if snapping out of a trance. Oh, he said, yes, of course. The next one. But he didn't move. He just stood there, his eyes searching mine, as if trying to decipher a hidden message. The moment stretched, taut and electric. It felt like anything could happen. He could lean in and kiss me. I could lean in and kiss him. Or we could just keep hanging pictures, pretending that nothing had changed. The possibilities swirled around me, dizzying and intoxicating. I waited, holding my breath, wondering which path we would choose. You've been so helpful, I blurted out, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I really don't know what I would have done without you. It was true, but it also felt like a subtle invitation, a way of acknowledging the something more that was simmering beneath the surface. Mr. Henderson smiled, a slow, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Happy to help, he said, his voice a little rougher now. That's what neighbors are for. But his eyes said something different. They said, I know you feel it too. Star. He finally moved, picking up the next picture from the floor. It was an abstract print, a swirl of colors and shapes. So, where do you want to put this one? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. But the air was thick with unspoken questions, with possibilities that neither of us could ignore. The game had changed. We were no longer just neighbors hanging pictures. We were something more. Or at least, we could be. I said, pretending to study the wall. Maybe over there, near the window? It needs something colorful. I was trying to sound casual, but my voice was a little shaky. Mr. Henderson held up the picture, tilting his head. You have a good eye for color, he said, his gaze lingering on me. This piece really suits the room. You have great taste. The compliment felt different than before. It wasn't just about the picture, it was about me. It was a way of saying, *I see you. I appreciate you. And it sent a fresh wave of heat rushing through my veins. I shifted my weight, trying to appear nonchalant. Thanks, I mumbled, my cheeks flushing. I just know what I like. He chuckled softly. That's a good quality to have. He paused, then added, his voice a little lower, in more ways than one. The air crackled with electricity. This was definitely escalating. But I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. I climbed back up the ladder, my legs feeling a little wobbly. Mr. Henderson steadied the ladder as before, his touch on my arm sending familiar shivers through me. As I positioned the abstract print against the wall, I found myself imagining what it would be like to kiss him. What would his lips feel like? Would he taste like coffee and Old Spice? Would he be a good kisser? The thought was so vivid, so unexpected, that I almost lost my balance. I grabbed onto the ladder, my heart pounding in my chest. This was crazy. I couldn't be thinking about kissing my 59-year-old neighbor. And yet, I couldn't stop myself. The image was stuck in my head, playing on repeat. His lips, his eyes, his smile. I took a deep breath, trying to clear my head. But it was no use. The desire was there, undeniable and overwhelming. I had to do something. But what? I glanced down at Mr. Henderson. He was watching me intently, his expression unreadable. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition? Understanding? Was he feeling this too? The thought hit me like a thunderbolt. It wasn't just me. He wanted me too. Or at least, he was open to the possibility. That was the only explanation for his lingering touches, his intense gaze, his suggestive comments. The realization gave me a jolt of confidence. If he was interested, then maybe, just maybe, this wasn't so crazy after all. Maybe this was meant to happen. Maybe fate had brought us together for a reason. I took another deep breath, steadied the nail, and started to hammer. This time, the strokes were stronger, more decisive. With each strike, I felt a surge of power, a sense of control. I was taking charge of the situation, claiming my desire. And I wasn't going to back down. The abstract print was going up, and so was the heat between us. The abstract print was up, a vibrant splash of color against the pale wall. I stepped back, admiring my handiwork. It looked good. We looked good. But there was still one picture left. And the tension in the room was so thick, you could cut it with a knife. It was time to make a decision. Was I going to act on this undeniable attraction, or was I going to pretend it didn't exist? I looked at Mr. Henderson, his eyes still fixed on me. I could see a hint of apprehension in them, a flicker of uncertainty. He was waiting for me to make the first move. The power was in my hands. And I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. But was I brave enough? Was I ready to cross that line, to risk everything for a chance at something real? The answer, I realized, was yes. I was. I carefully positioned the last picture, a simple black and white photograph of a tree silhouetted against the sky. It felt like a metaphor for our situation, stark, beautiful, and full of hidden depths. I hammered in the nail, the sound echoing in the room like a final punctuation mark. The picture was up. The task was complete. The living room looked fantastic. But something was still unresolved. The air was thick with anticipation, with unspoken desires. We had reached a crossroads, a point of no return. I stepped down from the ladder, my legs a little shaky. Mr. Henderson was waiting for me, his eyes full of questions. It was time to find out what the answer was. Well, I said, my voice barely a whisper, that's all of them. The ball was in my court. What would I do next? The silence was deafening. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. Well, he said, looking around the room, it certainly looks a lot better in here now, doesn't it? It was such a mundane comment, so utterly ordinary, that it almost made me laugh. Was he really going to play it safe? Was he going to pretend that none of this had happened? He picked up his toolbox, but he didn't move towards the door. He lingered, his gaze flitting around the room, avoiding my eyes. "You have a nice place here," he said, his voice a little strained. "Very cozy." I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. Was he going to say something else? Was he going to make a move? Or was he just going to leave, leaving me to wonder what might have been? The silence stretched out again, thick with unspoken possibilities. I knew I had to do something, say something, break the tension. But what? "You know," I said, my voice a little breathless, "it's awfully hot in here. Would you like something to drink? I have some iced tea, or maybe a soda?" It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was an invitation, a lifeline. A way of saying, I want you to stay. Star. Mr. Henderson paused, his eyes searching mine. I could see the question in them, the uncertainty. Was he brave enough to take the leap? He hesitated for a moment, then a slow smile spread across his face. "Iced tea sounds wonderful," he said, his voice a little husky. "Thank you." Relief washed over me, so intense it almost brought me to my knees. He was staying. He wanted this too. I turned towards the kitchen, my heart soaring. This was it. This was the beginning of something new, something exciting, something scandalous. And I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The pictures were hung, the stage was set. Now, it was time for the real show to begin. As I walked towards the kitchen, I could feel Mr. Henderson's eyes on my back, assessing, anticipating. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. This was really happening. I reached the refrigerator and opened it, peering inside. Iced tea, soda, bottled water, what would he prefer? It didn't really matter. The choice was just a formality. The real decision had already been made. I grabbed a bottle of iced tea and turned around, a smile playing on my lips. Mr. Henderson was still standing in the living room, his toolbox at his feet. He looked a little nervous, a little unsure. But there was also a spark of excitement in his eyes, a hint of something wild and untamed. I held out the bottle of iced tea, our fingers brushing as he took it. "So," I said, my voice low and a little husky, "where do we go from here?" His eyes met mine, and for a long, breathless moment, the world stood still. Then, he smiled, a slow, knowing smile that promised everything and nothing. "Wherever you want to go," he said softly. "It's your living room." And just like that, the game began.